Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from Rouse IAS.
Hello everybody, can all of you hear me and see me? Okay, great. So how many of you are aware of the fact that Mains 2020 is going on right now? Okay, everyone, nice. And how many of you have actually looked at GS 1, 2, 3, 4 and essay paper which was asked? Great, awesome. But let me see more hands. But what I can see, so everyone has looked at the papers? Yeah, great. This is going to be interesting. So that is why this session has been organized, because some of you have almost completed your foundation course. Some of you are in the middle of your foundation course. And so it would be a nice idea to explore how and what was the kind of paper, because we at Rouse IAS, in our 67 years of experience in civil services education, have felt that when students take up GS foundation course, they generally do not think about mains examination, because of course you start at a very basic level, and so the main focus is at most on the prelim stage. And the actual preparation for most of the candidates starts when they clear the prelims examination. And what they forget is that there are only 2-3 months, maximum 3.5 months to prepare, which is not sufficient to clear mains examination in one go. And so this is the right opportunity for us to integrate the preparation for mains 2021 into our preparation. And so what could be better than to first internalize the importance of mains examination in your final selection, right? Significance of mains examination. We know that there are 4 GS papers, 1 essay paper, and this is a mark sheet of rank 1, Mr. Pradeep Singh, who was rank 1 in 2019 UPSC examination. This is his mark sheet. And we know that GS 1, 2, 3, 4 paper along with essay and optionals, maximum marks is 1750. An interview is of 275 marks, right? And so let's look how Mr. Pradeep Singh performed. If you look at his interview marks, they are very average, 158. And I'm pretty sure that all of us know that in interview, the good marks are around 190 to 200. And despite getting so low marks, average marks in interview, Mr. Pradeep Singh secured rank 1 in UPSC, and that is because his marks in mains 914 are exceptional. And so 1750 marks form around 85% of the overall marks in UPSC. And so your destiny is decided in the mains examination. Of course, based on interview, your rank might vary. And so that is why the preparation of mains along with your overall preparation is very, very important. And so over a course of next 90 minutes, what we are going to do is that first we are going to analyze what were the questions which were asked in UPSC. Then we are going to understand why they were asked, because it is very important to understand the context of the questions, right? But if you know what and why, and if you don't know how, there is no need of this particular lecture, right? And so finally, we'll understand how you could have prepared to answer those questions. Is it understood? And when we'll go through all of this, you will understand the purpose of whatever we do. The GS Foundation course, along with the Blue Books, the NCERTs, why we make daily news simplified every day, and why just before your final examination, we give you Compass. What is its significance and how to use it? All of this will be covered in 90 minutes, and then we will have doubt sessions. If you have any query, we will take them up. Okay, so let us now begin by first understanding the distribution of the question of GS paper 1, right? As you can see on the screen, this is a trend, yearly trend, 2017, 2018, 19, and 20. Now in 2020, let's focus here. The maximum number of questions came from geography, which is plotted in orange color, and rest, history and sociology, had equal weightage. And as far as GS paper 1 is concerned, plus minus 1 question, but more or less 777. It does not vary drastically. And so an important takeaway for GS paper 1 is that you cannot ignore any particular portion in GS paper 1. You have to prepare notes, and you have to go through history, geography, as well as social issues or Indian society, right? And since the distribution of geography is maximum, Let us now begin with first looking at questions from geography and environment in paper GS1, right? And so there were 8 questions, and these are the question numbers. So when UPSC gives you paper, it arranges them starting with history, then geography, followed by Indian society, 10 markers and 15 markers. And so the question was about static topic, circum-Pacific zone, then desertification, melting of Himalayan glaciers, location of iron and steel industries, interlinking of rivers, flooding, potential of solar energy, and forest resources of India. Now, why we have shown you this slide is because out of these 8 questions, 4 questions can be directly mapped to the current affairs of last 1 year. Desertification, the question on interlinking, the question on flooding, and the question on forest resources of India. And now, why we have plotted these 2 types of question in different colors is to show you the significance of current affairs even in a static topic like geography. Because when we read geography, nothing changes. Cyclones were happening 50 years ago, earthquakes were coming then also, and so we believe nothing has changed. But that is true. But what UPSC will ask in examination is more often than not is decided by what was in the news in last 1.5 years. And let us understand that how they can be mapped with the current affairs of past 1 year, right? And so that is why when we have said that we are analyzing themes asked in geography, we have not written geography sub-theme. We have just written current affairs. Let's see how. Starting with September 2019, India hosted the 14th Conference of Parties on UNCCD. UNCCD is an agency of United Nations which deals with desertification, which is a big problem in most of the world. And it is held biennially, and that is after 2 years, and it was held in India. And so it was very important, and that is why you have a question on desertification, right? We will go into some of these questions also, and we'll understand how you could have answered that. But let us now just see how they can be mapped with the current affairs, okay? Then you have a question, then interlinking of rivers has been a traditional concept, but since last 1 year, UP and MP have started to negotiate the Ken-Betwa link project. Both of these rivers emerge in Madhya Pradesh, and so you have a question on interlinking of rivers. Then massive floods 2020 in Hyderabad and Pune. You have a question on flooding, right? And focused on urban flooding. And then finally, status of forest report comes every 2 years. Forest Survey Institute located in Dehradun comes out with this report, which talks about the overall status of forest in the country. And it came in December 2019, essentially, which means January 2020. And so you have a question on status of forest resource in India. Is this point clear to everyone? Right? Are we on the same page? That geography, even though static, is very, very important. Current affairs plays a very, very important part even in a static topic like geography, right? Okay. And so let us now see what was the marks distribution. So 8 questions in geography, 4 from current affairs, and out of those 4, 3 were 15 markers. So not only 50% was allocated to current affairs, but also the marks distribution was heavily on the side of current affairs. So more marks could be fetched if the current affairs was prepared very well for mains examination, right? Importance of current affairs, not only in terms of numbers, but also in terms of marks, right? And so let us now take up this question quickly and see how you could have addressed this question, or if this question is asked again, how you will answer it, and how to approach the themes appearing in the newspaper, and how to make notes so that any kind of questions can be answered, right? And so the question is, the interlinking of rivers can provide viable solutions to the multi-dimensional interrelated problems of droughts, floods, and interrupted navigation, right? This is the question. And so the main body part of your answer should be addressing this, that how, if you connect 2 rivers, how it is going to solve the problem of how it will provide solutions to droughts, right? That has to be substantiated first. Floods, and how it will solve the problem of interrupted navigation, right? But if you read the whole question in a sequence, it says critically examine. Now these words, if read together with the statement of a question, means that there has to be some downside of this particular project as well, right? If everything is so rosy about this project, why isn't Government of India implementing that? Point clear? And so you have to talk about some issues, or you can word it as challenges, or you can call it demerit, whatever you want to like. Since UPSC has not given in this question any particular word, you can say anything about it, right? And so this is a daily news simplified done on 4th of March 2020. That is 6 months before the mains examination. And at that time, mains was to be held in October, although it got delayed. And so this news appeared related to central government conceptualizing an authority taking care of all the interlinking projects. So we first started by understanding what interlinking of river is, which is connecting two or more rivers through the network of dams and canals. It's a basic concept, right? Then we talked about need. Why is there a need for interlinking of rivers? Because the rainfall in India is monsoonal, and it is limited to 4 months in a year, right? And so for 8 months throughout a year, there is no rainfall. And so you need to preserve the water which has fallen in an area for 4 months so that it can last for the whole year, right? But then when rainfall falls for 4 months, it falls heavily in some of the selected areas like Western Ghats, like Indo-Gangetic and Brahmaputra Valley, right? And so the distribution of rainfall is not only temporally localized, but it is also spatially localized. And what it creates is that it creates a region of surplus water, and it creates a region of deficit water which ultimately those areas which become drought prone. And would it not be nice to connect this water surplus region with the water deficit region? And so that is what the interlinking of river is all about. And so what it will do is that since it will transfer the surplus water, there will be no flood, or at least the intensity of the flood will reduce, because the surplus water is anyways going into ocean, which is of no use to us, right? And so the problem of flood is solved. The problem of drought is solved. Since you are going to create a lot of canals to transfer this water from the surplus to the deficit region, along the way, you are going to irrigate a lot of agricultural land as well. So it is going to extend the agriculture, right? Then most of the rivers originating in peninsular India do not have their source in any of the glaciers. And so during the 4 months when they receive rain, they flow in their full capacity. But as soon as the rainfall recedes, you cannot navigate in them because their depth reduces, because there is no water. And so when you transfer this water from this region to that region, the problem of navigability is also solved. And since you are going to create a lot of dams, you can also harness the hydropower. Is this point clear? And so when we discuss floods, droughts, and navigability, this is what exactly has been written by UPSC: droughts, floods, and interrupted navigation. Right? Is this point clear? Now, in the same DNS, we just did not discuss the need. We also discussed what are the concerns. And there are concerns which can be categorized into various categories. Let's start with political. We just saw that how Ken and Betwa has been negotiated between MP and UP, right? So because most of the rivers originate in some state and then go through many states, finally merging with the ocean. And so when you interrupt the flow of the water at one particular point, it is going to create troubles with many states. And so it will create an issue of federalism. It will require a lot of political will to negotiate such a deal. Then Once you create dams, they are going to displace a lot of people, and so it will be a social problem to deal with. Environmental challenges, very straightforward. A river is flowing since a very long time, and so there is a biodiversity which has been built along that river. And if that flow of river is going to change, the biodiversity along with that is also going to change. There will be more flow in some areas, there will be lesser flow in some areas, right? Since you are going to submerge a lot of areas, you are going to submerge forests also, and so it will create deforestation. And just like in Punjab and Haryana, extra irrigated water has created the problem of salinization. These new canals which will irrigate newer lands will also create salinization. And so this is environmental. Then you have some other challenges that like climate change. You are going to create the water surplus of 2020 with water deficit of 2020. But in 2020, this is the scenario. In 2050, rainfall pattern might change, looking at the rate at which the climate change is taking place. And so high variability in rainfall, and this project requires high infrastructure. This project requires very high cost. You have to build 100 dams and more canals. And so after such a financial investment, if the rainfall pattern changes, this whole infrastructure will be of no use to us. And so this is what the content of this answer is, right? You have to first solution, but you are left with introduction and conclusion, right? And so introduction has to be something which, as we have already discussed in our mains QIP program, which lays the ground for the solution or the body part, right? And so in the introduction part, what you can do, you can basically start by describing what interlinking of the river is, right? But that is a very generic answer. Since you know that Ken-Betwa project has been negotiated in the past 1 year, you can directly start that the issue of interlinking of rivers has again come into news or has gained prominence because of the negotiation of interlinking of river water between Ken and Betwa, between UP and MP. And so that has again put this particular phenomena under news, and because it has these benefits, but it has its own share of challenges. And then finally, you can conclude that some of the smaller interlinking projects like Ken and Betwa, it is very small. Ken and Betwa are together, they form the tributary of Yamuna. So if you link Ken and Betwa, it is not going to change the flow of the water in Yamuna river, right? So small interlinking projects like Ken and Betwa can be implemented, but not like Ganga and Godavari, which are two different basins altogether. Is this point clear? Okay, so let us now move on. So this was the coverage in DNS, and this is the coverage in our Compass magazine, which is just before the mains examination. We discussed the benefits of interlinking, where we discussed all the benefits and the challenges. Let's take up another question, which is the flooding. Account for the huge flooding of million cities in India, including the smart ones like Hyderabad and Pune. Suggest lasting remedial measures. Now let us just first look at as to if there is a trend in UPSC regarding this. And so when we explore the past year question papers, we find that in 2016, UPSC asked major cities of India are becoming more vulnerable to flood conditions. Major cities, million cities. Get it? Next, the frequency of urban floods due to high intensity rainfall is increasing over the years, again in 2016. Same year, same theme, question asked in GS1 and GS paper 3. Right? And so you have a question in 2020 as well of 15 marks, account for huge flooding of million+ cities in India. So floods come every year. UPSC has already asked question twice in the same year in the past. And so it was, I would not say it was expected that UPSC asked, but that is one of the topics which you will definitely prepare walking into 2020 mains examination. And so let us now solve this question. First, understand the main demand of the question. Account for. What does account for means? You have to explain the causes of the flooding, right? So in the past, UPSC has already asked directly, what are the causes of urban floods? Now they simply cannot use the same sentence. And so they played with the words, and in the body parts, you are expected to first explain the causes of urban floods. Is it clear? And then suggest lasting remedial measures, right? So you have to suggest measures which are long-term or which are lasting, right? And so again, Daily News Simplified, 27th of July 2020. It was the same time when the Pune and this Hyderabad flood was occurring. And so we started the DNS by first showing the same past year question, which I just showed you. The frequency of urban flood due to high intensity, we discussed that. And then we started by explaining what is flood, overflow of water, where the discharge of river becomes greater than the capacity of the river channel to hold that water. Ultimately, that is the flood. But you don't have to write this into your answer. That is where the mains test series come into play. You have a content, but you have to write that in 250 words. And when you practice mains test series questions and answer, you will understand what is the relevance of which part of your notes into the answer. So if you write that, you have already taken 30 to 40 words, and you are left with only 200 words to explain your rest of the things, right? And so in that DNS, we discuss the causes. And so when you look at the man-made causes, these are the reason for urban floods. Because floodplains are natural, but the problem is that we go and make our houses in the floodplains, which is not expected of us. Then what we do is that we destroy the natural wetlands, which are natural absorbers of water, which is what happened in Kashmir, Chennai, even in Hyderabad. Natural wetlands, what they do, this has been explained in the DNS as well. They are normal water bodies, but they have a high capacity to hold water in times of surplus. They act like a sponge. What we have done, we have deforested the upstream of river, because of which water holding capacity of river has gone down because there's so much of silt. It also slows down the river, and so it creates a backlog of water which ultimately overspills, right? Then our dam management near to cities is very, very faulty. It is a very delayed decision to open the gates of the dam, and by the time we open the dams, it has already been late. And in case of Hyderabad, it was heavy precipitation, cloud burst along with cyclone. So these are the causes of urban flood. And you have to add one point, that our drainage system is not so well adapted to deal with. So basically we're talking about city infrastructure. So that is about the causes of the floods, right? And then it also talked about long-term measures. In the same DNS, we discussed lasting remedial measures, right? You first need to map the flood-prone regions. You need to understand which are low-lying areas which are more vulnerable to flood. Water first enters the low-lying areas which are connected to the river. And for that, you will need micro-mapping. Then the city municipality need to control the land use so that the encroachment over floodplains as well as wetlands can be removed so that no one settles down there. We need to afforest the areas, rejuvenation of wetlands. There needs to be a proper and scientific and a coordinated dam management. So there on a river, there are series of dams. And if the floodgates of all of them are open together, obviously it is going to lead to the flood in the city which is downstream that dam, right? And so finally, interlinking of rivers so that the spill can be transmitted to southern areas, right? So these are the lasting remedial measures. And here comes the importance of, as I have said, mains test series. Because let's say you have got all this content in your compass and as well as focus. But impact of floods are also the part of flood, because ultimately UPSC can ask what is the socio-economic and political implication of a vast flood. Once you practice mains test series, you will understand that this portion will not form the part of your answer. And when you practice answer writing within 9 minutes, when you write the full 3 hours full length test, then only you will understand what to take from your notes and how to make it concise, so that not only you meet the word limit, but also you save time, right? Okay. And so this is our compass, all the urban floods. This is Compass 2020, reasons for urban flood and how to resolve this situation, and also the mains test series question to make you practice from the same content, so that you understand what it takes to write a 250-word answer within 10 minutes. And once you write it, you will find it's not very easy. Okay. So 2 questions from And after the current affairs, we move to a portion of physical geography, static topic, which has directly come from your classes, from your blue books, right? The syllabus of the portion is salient features of world physical geography, important geophysical phenomena such as earthquakes, tsunami, volcanic activity, cyclones, geographical features. And I am sure all of you who have gone through geography classes must have gone through the course on plate tectonics, right? And so let's first look at the previous year question paper and see whether you can answer them or not. Explain the formation of thousands of island arc and in Indonesia and Philippines archipelago. You just have to describe subduction. Why are the world's fold mountain system located along the margins of the continent? Continent-continent collision, right? Converging plate boundaries. That's it. You just have to identify the underneath concept. What do you understand by theory of continental drift? Discuss the prominent evidences. Are these things included in your notes or not? Yes. And see, this year, they have asked another thing. Discuss the geophysical characteristic of circum-Pacific zone. Right? Let's answer this question utilizing our blue books. And you can see, well, if you go through your blue books, you will understand destructive plate margins. These are called convergent plate margins, which means that 2 plates are colliding with each other. And then circum-Pacific belt and mid-continental belt are examples of convergent plate boundaries. So when UPSC expects you to discuss the geophysical characteristic, you just have to explain the phenomena which is going on there. And so what is happening is that mostly the Pacific plate is subducting underneath the South American plate. And we will see, and that diagram has also been given into the, and that diagram has also been given in the blue book. This is what is known as ring of fire, right? And this is what circum-Pacific zone is. And if you see all along, there are volcanoes and earthquakes. We understood that this is important because this is very typical, because 75% of the world's volcano as well as earthquakes are located in this area along this trend. And the reason behind is that Antarctic plate is subducting beneath South American plate, Nazca plate, right? And then you have in this portion, the Pacific plate, which is oceanic plate, is subducting beneath Eurasian plate. And so Pacific is surrounded by subduction zone throughout. And we know what happens is that when oceanic plate is heavier, right, its density is more than the continental plate. And so whenever it collides with the continental plate, it goes down, it melts, and then you have creation of volcanoes. And so if you take the earthquakes which are deeper, the distribution of that is here, because you have oceanic crust which has gone to a depth of 20 to 30 kilometers, and when its density is changing, earthquake is taking place. And so that is why you have deeper earthquakes in this location. And so this is what is the geophysical characteristic of circum-Pacific zone. So you can, in the introduction, you can directly start with the circum-Pacific zone is a set of, or a group of, let's just delete all this. Many convergent, right, or destructive plate boundaries. And then you have to take words exactly from the question, and you have to talk about geophysical characteristic, it would be better if you draw the diagram, and if you can just draw the rough diagram showing that here Antarctic plate is going beneath South American plate, here Nazca plate is going beneath this, here the Pacific plate is going beneath the Eurasian plate. That's it. Is it clear to everyone? Okay, so we have taken 3 questions out of the 8 which were asked in geography, 1 from the totally static topic and 2 from the current affairs. So the takeaway, an important takeaway from this part is that current affairs is an integral part of geography portion, right? And let's now move on to the social issues. And first, let's have a look at the themes which were asked in 2020 mains. So we had a question on caste. We had a question on COVID-19 pandemic. We had a question on regionalism. We had a question on globalization. We had a question on customs and tradition. And we had a question on digital initiatives. Okay, so these are the 6 questions, 3 10 markers, 3 15 markers. Okay. And so here also, 3 questions have their motivation in the current affairs. This is very direct. Lockdown, digital education. Because of lockdown, there is a massive push towards digitalization of education, right? We'll understand how this question directly deals with the current affairs, and of course, COVID-19 pandemic. There's no need to explain why it is a part of current affairs, right? And let us now take this question on regionalism and understand how the static topic of regionalism takes its motivation from the current affairs. And so first, let's have a look at the past year questions which UPSC has asked. In 2013, UPSC asked, growing feeling of regionalism is an important factor in generation of demand for a separate state. Discussed. So in 2013, UPSC connected the demands for various states with the regionalism. Then in 2016, pretty straightforward question, what is the basis of regionalism? Or in other words, the cause of regionalism? Is it that unequal distribution of benefits of development on a regional basis eventually promotes regionalism? Substantiate your answer, right? And then in 2017, in the context of the diversity of India, can it be said that regions form culture units rather than states? Now, when I say it is a part of current affairs, I have to show that there is some significant event or development throughout this year. And so in 2019, Andhra Pradesh passes a bill giving 75% job reservation for locals. Regionalism. Regionalism, what is regionalism? Preferring people from your own region over others. And this is a preferential treatment. Haryana, similarly, Haryana passes bill to reserve 75% of private sector jobs for locals. That is like 1.5 months before the mains examination. And finally, throughout the year, you saw how Assamese people were opposed to Citizenship Amendment Act, and they wanted to enforce the National Register for Citizens because they want to weed out people who do not belong to Assam. This is correct. Whole country, most of the people in the country could be in favor of Citizenship Amendment Act, but not Assamese, because it gives citizenship to Hindus as well, right? Which will eventually settle down in Assam because they already live there, most of them, who came from Bangladesh. So this was the question. And so this was the build-up. And finally, UPSC asked in 2020, do you agree that regionalism in India appears to be a consequence of rising cultural assertiveness? Now, don't go if you find these words difficult. Let's just break it down and simplify the main demand of the question, okay? The main demand of the question is that we have regionalism. No one is questioning that. Everyone can feel that. But UPSC wants you to argue if it appears to be a consequence of rising cultural assertiveness. So basically, in simple words, it says that when you start to wear your culture on your sleeves, or when you start to associate people based on the culture, that is when we develop regionalism. Is it not the main demand of the question, right? And so let's take some example, because you have to argue, you have to support that. What are the part of the culture? Part of the culture is language. And so When Assam for Assamiyas movement is led, or Punjab for Punjabis, or Maharashtra for Marathis, that is a result of a language. And so you can say, when you substantiate your answer, that yes, language results in regionalism, right? When you have a demand for separate statehood on the basis of religion, you have Kashmir. Even though Jammu and Kashmir are together, but people of Jammu want a separate state because it is on the basis of religion, right? Then another aspect of culture is ethnicity, right? And so when you start to associate on the basis of ethnicity, you have problem of Greater Nagalim. They don't have a common language. They are a group of around 100 tribes, but since their ethnicity is common, they want a separate Greater Nagalim, and they want that mega state to be created by taking away land from Manipur, from Assam, from Arunachal. And so that is why, so what UPSC has said is partially true. When you assert your culture, regionalism is born, but it is not always true, right? It is not always true, because this is Daily News Simplified on 7th of July, because there are economic reasons, there are political reasons as well. Can you see on the screen? Okay. And so when Andhra Pradesh decides to give 75% reservation to the locals, it is because outsiders moving into their cities are taking away their jobs. And that is not cultural assertion. That is economic. It has a basis in the economics. Is this clear? Then when outsiders settle in a city, they become voters. Their children become voters. And so it leads to the political dilution, which was earlier controlled totally by the locals. Now you have outsiders deciding who will be the MP and who will be the chief minister. And so it has, and so when you argue in this particular question, you first part of your answer should be yes, that it is a cultural assertion which leads to regionalism. But once you substantiate your answer with examples, you have to ultimately, because since you have only 150 words, you don't have much space, you just write cultural assertion as a regionalism as a result of cultural assertion can be shown by following example: assertion of language, assertion of religion, assertion of ethnicity, examples. But there are other, but the genesis of regionalism have other factors as well. And then you describe economic and political reasons. Is this point clear? Okay. Of course, it was covered in great detail in our Daily News Simplified, where we discussed everything related to basics as well as the causes of regionalism. This was also covered in our blue books, which might have been handed out to you, where see, we have covered the basic concept, what is region, and then what is regionalism, different forms, then causes of regionalism, right? So this is there in your static notes as well as a form of class. And so in our mains test series, we asked you, regionalism in India is driven by geography. Look at the correlation. Once you have read the causes of regionalism, in mains test series, you just had to substantiate whether it is born by geography, identity, and sense of deprivation, which is an economic reason. Right? Once you have written this answer, you know, once you have practiced this in the exam-like situation, you know how to extract the relevant information from these 20 pages. And you walk into the UPSC examination hall, you know how to go about it, because almost the same thing. The focus here is on culture, focus there is on identity and social deprivation and sense of deprivation, right? Okay. Let's take another example from society part, and that is the effects of globalization on Indian society is a part of the syllabus. It is a line from syllabus. And so when we say effects of globalization on Indian society, what do we mean? So globalization, we know what is globalization. The basics are clear. It's nothing but the increasing interconnectedness between different parts of the world. And so when UPSC expects you to address the effects on Indian society, you have to bifurcate the Indian society into various axes, right? Society consists of caste. And so you have to prepare your notes on what would be the effect of globalization on caste. Then society consists of gender. And so you will have to understand how the process of globalization is impacting males and females in the society, right? Then you will have to talk about religion, how it is impacting religion. This is what I am saying is how you will prepare notes, and you will see how all the questions in the past year can be answered just by this flowchart. Then you will have to talk about the age factor, because globalization is a process which is impacting elderly in a different way as compared to youth. And working class is obviously impacted separately. And so you will have to prepare notes how it is impacting elderly, young, and middle class. And finally, an integral part of our existence is culture. And so you will have to talk about how globalization is impacting the culture as well. Now let's see what UPSC has asked. Critically examine the effect of globalization on the aged population in India. 2013, done. 2015, discuss the positive and negative effects of globalization on women in India, gender, done. To what extent has globalization influenced the core cultural diversity in India? Culture, done. Globalization is generally said to promote cultural homogenization, but due to this, cultural specificities appear to be strengthened in the Indian society. Again on culture, on the same theme, because everyone believes that once we come in contact with the process of globalization, we dilute our unique culture, and we take, mostly it is westernization, but westernization is different from globalization. But what you see is similar kind of dressing, food, thought, language across the world, right? And so that is why twice UPSC asked about the declining diversity as a result of globalization. Then again, are we losing our local identity for global identity? The wording, the formulation of the question is changing with each year, but the gist of the question, the core body part is almost the same. And then in 2020, UPSC asked, is diversity and pluralism in India under threat due to globalization? To what extent globalization has influenced the core cultural diversity? Opposite of diversity is homogenization. Then are we losing our local identity? And is the diversity under threat? Is this point clear to everyone? For 4 consecutive years, UPSC is asking almost the same theme, and it expects you to answer almost the same concept, decline of diversity, whether it is true or not. And so let's just now quickly answer this question. But before that, this was a mains QIP program where we discussed, I drew the same flowchart where we talked about culture, age, and we talked about same thing. We identified the same pattern there as well. And so let us just now quickly identify the main demand of the question, right? First of all, let's just leave pluralism for a while because it is a political concept, and let's just deal with diversity. And one important fact is that here an important set of 3 words are used, which is justify your answer. And now this is trickier because what people would do who have not practiced answer writing, they would show diversity under threat. Yes, these are the factors. Diversity not under threat. These are the answers. No, you cannot justify both. And so you have to take a one stand and justify your answer. So here, when you are asked to say some when there is a question with a statement followed by critically examine or argue or discuss, which is different from justify your answer. You have to take one side and then justify. You can't justify both sides, right? You can only justify one side, what you think. And so there is no denying the fact that diversity, which includes culture, which includes religion, which includes language, which includes dressing, all these have been impacted because of, as an effect of globalization. And there is no need to substantiate it how it has been impacted, right? Almost uniform dressing in urban middle class throughout the country, right? Increasing penetration of English words in most languages. In fact, some languages are even disappearing because of its disuse. As far as religion is concerned, more and more number of people in younger generation are kind of agnostic, right, from all the religions. In some religion, the trend could be, the pace could be slower, but it is almost the same. And as far as culture is concerned, most of them, due to the use of internet, social media, and apps, their culture is more of same. The kind of meme we share, the kind of reels we make on Instagram, if you go to the trends, you will see on the same background songs, the reels are being made both in US and in India, right? Is this correct or not? I think you can correlate to this one. Yeah. And so as a result of globalization, the diversity which existed 50 years ago, if you go to Maharashtra, you will see a person dressed in dhoti, also a woman dressed in a sari, which was very different from the dressing in UP has changed. If you go to Mumbai and if you go to Delhi or any other place, even in Manipur, you will see almost the same kind of dressing, which is quite Western influence. And so that's how you will justify your answer. But of course, this answer expects a conclusion from you which is pre-decided. You can't say that everything has been homogenized. And so in the concluding remark, you can add, or you should add, a process of globalization, adaptation of the globalized forces for local conditions. And the best example would be that when you go to McDonald's, you see Mac Aloo Tikki, right? That is how McDonald's has modified its chains in India, its products in India, to sound like Mac Aloo Tikki and Mac Maharaja, which is non-existent in any other place in our country. Burger has never been made by adding a layer of tikki in between the two layers of bread. And so that is the process of globalization. And so this is a concept which has also been given in NCERT. And so finally, you can conclude that the process of globalization has induced homogenization and reduced the diversity. But the global forces have also changed themselves to suit to the local conditions, right? This is the line which you can take. There can be some innovative. And so in our blue books, which are handed out in your classes, effects of globalization on Indian society, right, is given. We discussed globalization and India, social dimension of globalization. Globalization has impacted Indian society, and global dimension, globalization and its cultural dimension. This is what the question is all about. How it has impacted the culture of India. And this has been the theme since past 4 years, right? Okay, so after Indian society, let's now move on to the history part. History part has been a bit surprising as well as a little bit unpredictable. There were 6 questions, and for the first time, UPSC has asked 4 questions from art and culture, which has never been the case. And so we had a question on rock cut architecture. We had a question on Pala period and Buddhism. We had a question on Indian philosophy and how it is reflected in monuments of India. Then we have a question on Persian literary sources. And then so these are the 4 questions from not from current affairs. Here the red color is about art and culture. And so 4 questions from art and culture and 2 questions from modern India. And so post-independence and every other world history got neglected this time. But in 2015, there were 2 to 3 questions from world history. So when you prepare for 2021, there is no theme which is unimportant. If you want to secure your rank, your selection with a good rank, make sure that you prepare all of them. But for preparing a particular topic, keep in mind the previous year questions. And so let's see how the previous year question comes handy. In 2018, UPSC asked, assess the importance of accounts of the Chinese and Arab travelers in the reconstruction of the history of India. Okay. Now, if we talk about ancient India, we have temples, right? We have inscriptions of Ashoka. We have literary sources from Greek and Roman. But when we talk about medieval India, since most of the medieval time, India was ruled by Mughals, before that Lodhis and everyone, they were mostly Persians. They wrote their inscription in Persian. So this year, UPSC asked question on Persian literary sources. Now, when you open the NCERT book of class 12th, the first chapter is about the travelers and their tales. And it talks about Chinese travelers and what they told about India. Then it talks about Arab travelers and what they discussed about India. And it also tells you what they tell you, what Persian sources tell you about India. And there is another source, because followed by Persian, the Europeans came. And so we have Italians, Dutch, and British travelers also, like Tavernier and everyone. And so that has also been given. So when you prepare for 2021, make sure that the chapter on travelers is prepared. Right? And so let's discuss Persian literary sources of medieval India reflects the spirit of age. What is the main demand of this particular question? You have to show that how the spirit of the age, or what is the spirit of age? The spirit of age or a particular period in history is, we can't see the history, right? So obviously we will have to depend upon some indirect source. And so what we want to know when we study history, we want to know about the administration, right? We want to know whether it was a monarchy or a democracy. If it was a monarchy, what kind of monarchy it was, how the administration was carried out in urban and rural areas, right? Then we want to know about what kind of religion was prevalent like 700 years ago. We want to know about what was the society like in terms of, specifically for India, in terms of caste. Because when people say that caste system has been going on since last 2,500 years, there must be some source. There must have been some traveler who visited India in 500 BC and wrote in his accounts that India follows a system of Varna or a caste system, right? So these are, or society also has rural and urban divide. And so this, you had to talk about India by mentioning the Persian literary sources, right? So if you open the NCERT book, you will see Making Sense of an Alien World, Al-Biruni. Al-Biruni was a traveler who came to India, and see what he has talked about India. He talked about language. What is language which is prevalent? So another aspect of society is language. Is it clear or not? Right? Then he talks about barriers to understanding. How many barriers were there in India before he could start interacting? And so he said, aware of the problems inherent in the task he had set for himself, obviously all the sources in India at that time were in Sanskrit language. So it shows the hegemony of Sanskrit in even during medieval times in terms of the content. Then the second barrier he identified was the difference in religious beliefs and practices, and the insularity of the local population. What is insularity? Insularity is like introvert. What we call a person as introvert, society as a whole is called insularity. Some societies do not like to interact with foreigners, right? And so then Al-Biruni's description of caste system, Al-Biruni tried to explain the caste system by looking for parallels in other societies. So if you have to describe the spirit of the age, you will say that caste system was prevalent even during medieval times, as described by Al-Biruni, right? He noted that in ancient Persia, so he compared it with Persia. Then again, he highlighted the importance of Brahmins even 900 years ago, right? This is Al-Biruni's account of the system of Varnas. The highest caste are Brahmana, of whom the books of the Hindus tell us that they were created from the head of the Brahman, Brahma, right? So whatever we understand was also told by, is also correlated by the accounts of Al-Biruni. And so just not Al-Biruni. We have our understanding of the working of the rural society does not come from who worked on the land as peasants, did not write themselves. Our major source for the agrarian history of the 16th and early 17th centuries are chronicles and documents from Mughal court. Because one of the most important chronicles was the Ain-e-Akbari, authored by Akbar's historian Abul Fazl. So when we talk about society, main accounts come from the Persian writer Al-Biruni. When we talk about rural society and administration, the main account come from Ain-e-Akbari, written by Abul Fazl. And then Abdul Qadir Badayuni was also a prominent. So all these things are given there simultaneously in NCERT, how these people described the then Indian society. Right. So when you prepare for your mains 2021, make sure that you prepare the chapter on travel. There are only 4 chapters in ancient, there are only 4 chapters in medieval, and similarly 4 chapters in modern India. And so along with your standard textbook like Bipin Chandra or Spectrum, make sure that you are thorough with the new NCERTs and not the old ones, which are massive ones. And so the recent trend is that UPSC has not only in prelims, but also in mains examination has started to follow the new NCERTs, right? Okay. And so let's now have a look at a question from modern India. Theme is modern India, the freedom struggle, its various stages, and important contributions from different parts of the country. And so this is a static topic. When you prepare for this topic, you should dissect this line of the syllabus into stages, because it has said its various stages. And so what were the stages of our freedom struggle? It is considered to be started in 1857. Then it came into various waves, right? We have non-cooperation movement, right? Before that, we have Swadeshi movement because of the bifurcation of the Bengal. Then arrival of Mahatma Gandhi, watershed moment in Indian history, non-cooperation movement, right? Civil disobedience movement and quit India movement, and finally independence. When you prepare these stages, what you will prepare along with that, you will prepare for each stage what were the causes, right? So for example, for non-cooperation movement, you will talk about World War I and Khilafat. These were the major 2 causes, right? Causes, who were the prominent people? Just wait a second. Who were the prominent people who participated in it? Because contributors and contributions. What was the prominent ideology which actually controlled the movement? Right? Is this point clear to everyone? Because when, just wait a second. Because when you look at the India's independence movement, what you see is that you started with a liberal side. The people who initially participated in the freedom movement were quite liberal. They were urban elites. They did not want the participation of the people in the rural areas. It was not so much of a mass movement, but as soon as the movement proceeded, it became a mass movement. It reached to the rural areas in our country, and that is how its base elongated or enriched, because more and more people got included into the movement, because of different ideologies, right? And so let's see from this part what kind of questions have been asked in the past. In 2019, just the last year, UPSC asked, many voices had strengthened and enriched the nationalist movement during the Gandhian phase. Elaborate. What is the Gandhian phase in Indian history? Gandhiji came in 1915-16, which is when he initiated, and for initial 1 or 2 years, he was not politically active. He was just trying to understand the Indian scenario, right? So that can be considered as 1916, right? Let's see what UPSC has asked this year. Since the decade of 1920s, the nationalist movement acquired various ideological strands and thereby expanded its social base. Just understand the main demand of the question. Many voices had strengthened and enriched the nationalist movement. What are the many voices? For a movement, voices are its ideology. That is how a movement makes its noise. And so in 2019, you had to elaborate how many voices, which means many ideologies, strengthened and enriched the nationalist movement. So once you start writing this answer, you talk about how the broad nature of Indian national movement, its capacity to absorb not only moderates, but also extremists, communists, leftists, socialists, everyone into its fold, enriched the nationalist movement. And then in this year, like 5 days ago, you had to show since the decade of 1920s, same Gandhian phase, starting of Gandhian phase, the nationalist movement acquired various ideological strands and thereby expanded its social base. Can you understand that the themes are limited? And if UPSC is going to ask questions, it's just going to play around with the words, because it has already been 7 years since UPSC is conducting the mains examination in new format. And so when you prepare for mains, make sure that you have notes.
बहुत अच्छा हो रहा है, लेकिन
every
ये बहुत अच्छा इनिशिएटिव है.
Just wait a second. Just wait a second. Actually, someone has. Can you hear me again? Okay, cool. Make sure that you prepare notes on each and every sentence of your syllabus. And once a question comes, you just have to identify which theme it belongs to. And so let's just quickly answer this particular question. We have understood the main demand of the question, right? And so so in the body part, you have to show that acquisition of ideology by the movement expanded social base, which means more the ideology, more the number of ideology in your movement, more will be your base, wider will be your base, right? So in the beginning of the independence movement, the prominent leaders were from Calcutta and Madras. They were highly educated. So they did not have any connect with the rural farmers, women, students, because they did not consider them fit enough to even interact with them, right? So what was their ideology at that point of time? Their ideology was moderates, and their tool was constitutionalism, right? They were inclined to debate with Britishers, utilizing the member of parliament or member of council position which Britishers themselves have created. So they were like, we will fight with Britishers, but we will first become MPs and MLAs. We will go to the parliament, and then there we will contest the idea of Government of India Act. These are called moderates, right? So, but inclusion of moderates is also very important. You need well-read people into your organization. Because they are the ones who know everything, what is happening across the world. They understand the various trends. But at the same time, when Gandhiji came, and even before that, there we know how the Congress split because of the battle between the moderates and the extremists. And finally, extremists took hold of the Congress. And so what is extremism? Extremism is not taking up gun and shooting a Britisher. Extremism is that we will not contain ourselves to the councils. We will go to the people. And so Tilak started the Home Rule League. And his idea was to go to the rural areas and propagate the British colonialism idea of British colonialism, Indian nationalism to the remote regions of our country. And then finally, when Gandhiji came, what he did? He took the causes of SCs and STs, the deprived classes then, SC, ST now, right? He started interacting with women. No one addressed women before Gandhiji, but when Gandhiji went to a town or a city, he made sure women join his meetings. And so once you start to address a particular section of a society, that is how you include them into your organization, into your movement. Then after this is 1920. So Russian Revolution has already taken place. And so its impact, the impact of communism is already being felt in India by 1920s and 25. And so you have formulation of Communist Party of India by 1920. Now, what is the idea of communism? The class divide. It always talks about the exploiters and the exploited. And so when a party is formed which talks about industrial workers, when a party is formed which goes to all the industries owned by Britishers and also Indians, and when they talk about the limitations on working hours, the pay raise, the leaves and everything, the industrial workers already get associated with that cause, right? Along with that, the cause of farmers in the form of Kisan Sabhas, that was a result of the impact of communism and socialism in our country. But the ideological base, so in a society, you have on the basis of age, elderly, young, and on the basis of gender, you have male, female. On the basis of ideology, you have some people who would like to be more violent than others. So you have revolutionaries as well. You had a parallel revolutionary movement going along, which was under the bed, under the table, supported by Congress. Do you agree? And finally, the Indian national movement was so broad that it had capitalists also feeling associated with the cause not of communism, but of Indian freedom. They understood that they're businessmen. And so under the British rule, even they cannot gain the full profits because the British administration in India is actually in favor of the capitalists sitting in London. And so they realized that they will become rich. Their business will grow only under Indian administration. This is what happened. The prominent people who supported Indian independence then, like Birla and Tata, became prominent businessmen and capitalists even after the independence because of their full support to Indian national movement. And so since the decade of 1920s, the national movement acquired various ideological strands. Moderate was allowed to exist because it has its own importance. But then what ideologies were acquired? Extremism, communism, socialism, right? Capitalism, and of course, the Satyagraha of Gandhiji, right? Is this point clear to everyone? Okay. And so when we discuss the main, each and every movement has an ideology, has contributions of many ideology. For example, in India's struggle for independence, we had liberals, we had moderates, we had extremists, we had communists, Marxists, socialists, all participating in various ways in India's struggle for independence. So this is a part of a clip which, this is a class which was organized in October for this particular mains. This was a part of mains QIP program. And so we discussed how to prepare for this portion of the topic of the GS1 syllabus. And so again, the same thing, stages, causes and event, main contributors, why did it fail? And as far as contributors are concerned, prominent people, groups, which includes the role of women in the Indian struggle, the roles of Hindus and Muslims and peasants in India's independence, and finally, the role of these different ideologies. And so let's say someone has prepared the role of liberals, moderates, extremists, and communists, as said in this particular lecture, in his or her notes copy. And then if this question comes, you just have to take one line from each of your pages and put it there. Because unless and until you have communist thought in your ideology, you cannot include industrial workers into your organization, into your movement, right? Unless and until you talk to women, you cannot include them, and that is how you widen your social base. And so all those organizations, all those movements which are focused on a particular single ideology never grow that much because their base is very narrow. So broader the base, broader is the efficiency of that movement, right? And so what are the important key takeaways from this particular conversation? Let us now begin the interaction, and let's just quickly discuss. I will segregate the takeaways in terms of the syllabus, right? An important takeaway number 1. Let's just decide about the sources. First, start with sociology. Or let's start with geography. Let's go in the sequence we discussed the. Do you think NCERT is important for geography? For mains examination? Yes. Okay. NCERT. What about blue books? Are they important? Yes. Good. What about current affairs? Current affairs very important for geography, right? Okay. What about the Indian society part? What are you going to do when you are going to prepare for mains examination this year? You're going to rely on blue books, right? And then you are again going to rely on current affairs, because this year also question on COVID and its impact, right? Again, digitalization of education, okay? And then for the Indian history part, you cannot ignore these books, themes in History of India, part 1, part 2, part 3, right? And of course, you have class notes and blue books. Now, if you are going to prepare, sources are done, but you are going to follow the syllabus and make notes on each and every sentence of the syllabus. That is a strategy for paper GS1, which might not be true for other papers, but for this paper, it is totally true. So you are going to focus on syllabus as well as on past year questions to make your notes. And on each topic, you are going to make notes, right? So if I talk about geography, what are the common patterns we have identified so far? Answer me in the chat box. Is there any trend emerging in the geography? Just on the basis of the previous year questions we have seen. Are disasters important? Disasters, flooding, great. So disasters are very important, right? Disaster management, correct. Static topic of plate tectonics, already 5 questions have been asked in past 6 mains exam in physical geography. And so in physical geography, the concept of geophysics or the plate tectonics is very, very important, right? Okay. Resources, right? Iron and steel industry, the question, very nice. For Indian society part, what do you think is the most important theme so far on the basis of the past year? Globalization, great. Globalization is the most important theme also. So when you see each word of the syllabus of Indian society, whether it is globalization, how you are going to approach it. So let's say you have to prepare secularism. We have not discussed that. Let's say you have to prepare, because that is left. The question was not asked this year, so we did not take it up. But of course, you will have to prepare a note on secularism. So how will you approach secularism? Are you going to first define secularism? Because UPSC can straight away ask a simple question, what is secularism? constitutional values, multiculturalism, preamble. Okay, so you will define secularism, difference between Western and Indian secularism. Great. Tolerance. Yeah. Are you going to discuss the threats to secularism? Right? Are we not going to prepare how secularism is threatened? What are the, and so the threats to secularism can come from society, can come from politics, and can also come from economy. When you see people from one particular region growing more than other, that also induces a sense of communalism, right? And so secularism opposed to communalism. Some philosophers preaching secularism, not for this particular topic, not in GS1. You don't have to go into philosophers, right? And so for Indian history, do you think any portion is less or more important? No, right? UPSC is very predictable. Nothing is more important. That is applicable for all the portions. But generally what people do is that they think return on investment is very low in art and culture. They think even if a particular question will be asked, I will have to spend 15 days to prepare it rather than I can do well in essay in GS4 or maybe in GS3. And let's see, UPSC has asked 4 questions from art and culture. And so if you have left art and culture, basically you are losing out on 50 marks out of 250. 2 15 markers and 2 10 markers. So if you have to, so if your aim is only to attempt mains examination, you can leave it. But if you want to get selected finally with a good rank, you have to prepare each and every part of the syllabus. Right? Is this point clear to everyone? Okay, great. So we are open for questions. Shall you have any doubts? Okay, Atul Kumar, please unmute yourself.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
So my question is that for society questions, like, is there any specific source for like data that should be quoted in this? So for example, we're talking about secularism or globalization. I know there are a bunch of like reports and indexes which come out throughout the year.
That's a very good question.
How can you use them, and like, is there any specific ones that you see that are useful across the board? If you could share that, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, sure. So Atul wants to ask that what are the set of reports and indices which we can utilize in Indian society part to substantiate our answers, right? So in globalization, it totally depends on the question, right? So for example, let's say there is a question on caste or the declining significance of caste, right? And so there is a data which says that out of all the secretary positions, only 5% at the top level belong to SC and ST, but we have been providing reservations since last 50-60 years. So this is a data which will become relevant there. Or for that matter, the data of caste and economic census, which was conducted recently, right? So depending upon, based on case to case basis, you have to decide, but there is no general trend. Just keep a track of current affairs. For example, National Family and Health Survey, the report of which came out recently, the 5th one. It has started to come in phases. And so we discuss it in DNS, that how it shall be relevant for your various portions of Indian society, and paper GS2 social justice, where the syllabus line says vulnerable sections of society, which means women and children, right? So for each portion, the source will vary, but if you keep a track of current affairs, you will get a lot of sources which shall be relevant. There is no common, there is no universal list or exhaustive list of sources which can be quoted everywhere, right? Okay.
Yes, sir. So I have a very basic doubt. So when we are writing an answer, it is easy to write and go ahead with the body of the answer, but it is very hard to write a good introduction, which is catchy and sets a good base for the rest of the answer. So how to approach a introduction?
Yeah. So if you haven't started writing mains questions, so initially begin with very basics. If a question has interlinking, describe what interlinking is, right? And so when we will evaluate that answer, we'll tell it to you that you could have used the current context. When you are writing an answer on globalization, you can directly begin by describing globalization. So that is how first you will have to ingrain the practice of introduction, because when we look at the copies, many copies do not have introduction as well. So first let's get started by writing basics. And depending upon feedback, once you have written 50, 60, 80, 100 answers, you will yourself understand this is very pretty basic. I can integrate current affairs with this, or I can match globalization with threats to political institutions, what kind of problem these understand. Then you will start to think along the main theme of the question. But for that, you will have to practice basics of globalization, and you must have written few answers on globalization to think of tertiary level introduction, right? So start with answer writing practice. So here we end the discussion. And so what it appears from the discussion, that most of you have actually looked at the paper, but have not actually started the answer writing. And so that is why we are rolling out our mains 2021 test series. Okay, it is high time that you integrate daily answer writing practice as well as attempting them in exam like situation. That is where the role of mains test series comes into play. Okay, so these will be set of many tests which will test you on almost on every theme which is important for UPSC, and it will get you kick started for mains 2021. Because just think of the scenario which is highly likely that if you clear prelims, you will only have 2 months, 2.5 months to prepare for mains, right? So just start practice answer writing and fine tune your approach, right, with the mains philosophy and thought. Okay, so we'll just take a half an hour break, and then the next session will begin, which will be taken by Baswa sir. Okay, so here I'll end the
Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from Rouse IAS.